Good evening, everyone. This is Rita Pani from the Center for Financial Studies at SP Jain Institute of Management and Research, welcoming you to today's panel discussion on economy and markets. Is there a dichotomy or no? Let me take a moment now to introduce you all to CFS. I'll share a couple of slides here for those of you who are not as familiar with CFS. So the Center for Financial Studies essentially is a center of excellence for finance. We aim to be the thought leader and knowledge partner to the industry in the area of finance. This is by providing a platform for collaboration between experts from academia, from industry, essentially people like you, and policymakers. So the 5 areas that we've chosen to focus on are accounting, governance and risk, fintech, financial inclusion, and policy and regulations. If you'd like to engage with us, please do write into us at cfs@spjimr.org or on the link that you see on the screen. Let's now dive into the panel discussion right away. It gives me immense pleasure and a sense of personal pride, since I am an alum of SPJIMR myself, to introduce you to today's panelists, 3 very accomplished alums of SPJIMR: Tahir Badshah, Mrinal Singh, and Ashish Agarwal. They are pretty well-known names in the world of finance, and I'm actually very glad that CFS as a platform has been able to bring them together. Tahir is the CIO equities for Invesco Mutual Fund, which is a global fund house, as you all know. With over around 25 years of investing experience in the equity markets, pretty much makes him the master in this art. Prior to Invesco, Tahir was head of equities at Motilal Oswal Asset Management. He's also worked with Kotak Mahindra Investment Advisors, ICICI Prudential Asset Management, amongst others. Tahir is a trained engineer, finds time for community service in his busy schedule, and of course is an alumnus of SPJIMR. Thanks for being here today with us, Tahir. Our second panelist for the day is Mrinal Singh. Mrinal is currently the Deputy CIO Equities at ICICI Prudential Mutual Fund. Over 18 odd years of experience across industries, including 10 years at ICICI Pru MF. He's known for his style of investing, which is value investing, manages large flagship funds like ICICI Prudential Value Discovery Fund. I've been invested in that fund myself. ICICI Prudential Focused Equity Funds, to name a few. Prior to joining ICICI Prudential AMC, he's also worked with companies like Wipro and Bosch. Mrinal, also like Tahir, is a trained engineer. He also teaches at SPJIMR. So for him, it is not practice what you preach, but it is more like preach what you practice. And of course, Mrinal is an SPJIMR alum. Thanks, Mrinal, for finding time to be with us here today. Our third panelist today is Ashish Agarwal. Ashish is the India country head for Jefferies, which is a US-based investment bank headquartered in New York. It has been actually rising in the league tables very, very swiftly. Ashish has had an unblemished career on the sell side. And having been on the sell side myself, I can actually say that. He's been a career banking analyst. He has been the #1 ranked banking analyst as rated by Institutional Investor and Asia Money polls. He's been on the sell side for over 18 years. Prior to Jefferies, Ashish was head of research at CLSA. He's also worked with Merrill Lynch and Edelweiss prior to that. A qualified CA, Ashish is also an alum of SPJIMR. So thank you, Ashish, Mrinal, and Tahir, for sparing time on a Sunday afternoon to talk about your favorite subject, which is the markets. Sorry, you guys had to put on your jackets yet again on a Sunday, but so be it. I guess that's what you do for SPJIMR. We've structured our panel discussion today a little differently. Given that we have Tahir and Mrinal from the buy side, and we have Ashish from the sell side, we figured we could get the sell side to have a go at the buy side. No, I'm only joking. Ashish very respectfully will moderate the session for the next 45 minutes. After which we will take questions from all of you who are listening in. A few things I thought I'd point out for the questions. Please do use the chat box. Please mark all your questions to all panelists and attendees so that everybody will have the benefit of the questions that you're asking. Due to compliance limitations, there may be some questions if they're stock specific that the panelists may not be able to address. So please do be mindful of that. That's pretty much in terms of housekeeping. Without further ado, over to you, Ashish. On economy and markets, is there a dichotomy?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rita. Good afternoon to all of you, and welcome on this afternoon session. Thank you for taking the time out to listen to Tahir and Mrinal. I'm myself looking forward to listen to their views on the topic. Rita, when you approached me, as you rightly said, the most important part of the conversation to me was it's fun to be on the other side of the table and quiz the buy side for a change. It would be also difficult for me to keep not sharing my views while having the conversation. As you can realize, a sell side guy is just supposed to keep talking. So for a change, I'll be on the other side listening to them. At the same time, the topic itself was very, very appealing. It is we've always read and made to believe that the markets are efficient. That's the core of our discussion point today. Are they really efficient, or they get out of sync with reality sometimes? Sorry. In the last 3 to 4 months, we've seen the market moving both sides on the extreme sentiments. Initially, we saw Nifty correcting almost 40% from the peak, and then subsequently recouping almost 2/3 of that in a very short span of time. Was the first correction an overreaction, or the subsequent rise is too optimistic? Is there a real disconnect between what's happening in the real economy versus what's reflected in the equity valuations? And we, of course, will start with Mrinal here to share his views. One small request, Mrinal, Tahir, while you answer this right at the start, if you can put some global context on whether what's really happening with India versus rest of the world as well, that would be helpful as well. So over to you, Mrinal.
Thanks, Ashish. It's a coincidence. Today is Guru Purnima. So being associated with the alma mater on the very auspicious day, great, we could do this. I look forward to more of this with SPJIMR. Again, to your question, Ashish, very pertinent question, the most talked about and the most relevant thing that people associated with the markets are talking, be it investors, be it even customers, unit holders, or any other stakeholders. So let me just, a lot being said about, the markets having almost fell by 38-40% in the first 3 months, and they were up again from the bottom 30-odd% in the next 3 months. But then this is not unusual. I mean, we've seen such volatility in the history of the markets, and I'm not talking too long ago. For example, I remember in 1987, on the so-called Black Monday, the markets fell 22% in a day. So, I mean, nothing of that sort happened. If it seems too far, in 2004 and 9, I think both the election days, the market hit a circuit, both up and down. So we've seen it even in the closer proximity. So these sharp movements in the market is something that we have seen enough, and I think this is not the last of it either. But let me draw some contours. So on the 14th of Jan this year, the market seemed to have touched at least a local high of 12,300 something. And if I look at those EPS estimates at that juncture, for FY20, the financial year that went past, so 530 odd rupees is where the street was. And even the FY22, I'm just skipping FY21 because FY21 is a washout, so let's not talk about those numbers. FY22, people were at around 820 odd on the EPS for Nifty, I'm talking about. So by end of June, that is 1st of July, when we look back at numbers, the FY20 ended 12% down. So in the next 2-3 months, we had, the EPS or the real EPS came 12% down. We had the FY22 estimates clearly brought down by the street, which were around 25% down. So although the market looks like 10,300 or something in terms of PE or P price to earning, it has already crossed the January peak. Now that's a way of looking at, at least in the institutional way of things, the earnings estimate, the profit estimates have come down. So the markets as they stand today, at least in the relative context to what the profit street is estimating in FY22, again, and FY21 is something that I keep aside for the time being. The markets is already higher than that. But then what has happened? Only 9 stocks from that day are higher than, amongst the 50, only 9 stocks are higher than what we've seen on that very days. Amongst 3 of them are healthcare, 3 are FMCG, and 1 each is between auto, telecom, and an oil and gas conglomerate, which does business in telecom and retail also. So what has happened is, although the market, at least in PE terms, reached a new high or breached the earlier past, we've seen a change in leadership. Now that's very important. The market is hinting at something. And the bottom of the table, where the stocks are far away from their recent highs, are the financial names, which is very clearly pointing that the market is worried about that sector and the prospects of that sector. Now, this is aggregate. Again, if I just look into the quarterly earnings of FY20 Q4, which we have just passed in terms of earning disclosures, the Y-on-Y Nifty earnings declined 24%. Now that's a very sharp decline, given that lockdown was practically only there for last week of March. And even BSE 500, the broader market, which is almost 94% of the market cap, the earnings were down 28% Y-on-Y. So that's a sharp downward movement. And I guess Q1 for current financial year would be sharp too. Interestingly, even the participation in the market, and now again, that's again data, in last 2 years, the cash volumes and derivative volumes, the F&O volumes, both have doubled. They're clocking monthly, 14,000 crores on the cash side and 36,000 crores on the F&O side. But if you look at the breakup, the FIIs have actually become from 33% of those cash volume markets to 19. The domestics actually have fallen from 21% to 14. And the retail, which used to be 40 odd percent, is now almost 70%. This is a very interesting data when I look at the retail is a real driver in the market as of now. And that's so both FIIs and domestic have actually compressed in terms of participation in the marketplace. So this dichotomy, the very relevant topic that we're talking about, to a great degree is a function of the participation and the belief that our people like our audience, instead of people like Tahir and me, so our participation in the market has come down. But nevertheless, if I look at the market, at least given what Fed has done in terms of liquidity injection, given the unprecedented nature of Corona crisis that we've seen, the markets at least tend to believe that the central banks globally are going to backstop or underwrite all the losses, which has a casualty. The casualty is that, it is also sending a wrong price signal in the sense that fundamentals are being ignored. So the markets obviously are more concerned or responding more to what the central banks are doing instead of what the near-term fundamentals are pointing at or hinting at. Now, again, in the same breath, most companies, because we've just walked out of an earnings season, most companies seem to be worried about their future. They're uncertain. They're talking about, that things are not clear, where things are fluid. So, but then the market, people who seem to call out the market seem to be more confident about how things are going to look ahead. So in my assessment, at best, what I would say that, the market or the economy remains fluid. Although the market has shown a sharp recovery, the growth in the economy or the recovery in the economy will be tepid. And in my view, a market is a little ahead of fundamentals, and that's known. The way it can be justified is if some kind of solution to Corona crisis, medical or otherwise, comes across and things revive faster globally, because this is not a local crisis. And hopefully we see some kind of economic activity or catalyst in that nature coming across and driving the whole GDP or the growth factor up. Over to you, Ashish.
Yeah, thanks, Mrinal. Tahir, would love to know your views before I have a few sub questions from Mrinal, but I'll come back to that once we go through you. Over to you, Tahir.
Hi, Ashish. At the outset, let me thank Rita for organizing this, and thank you, Rita, for having me on this panel discussion. It's great to kind of give back to SPJMR in some way or the other, and to that extent, I'm happy to be here. I'm with colleagues who are probably 10 years apart from me, but we are all contemporaries. as things stand today. So I'm looking forward to a good interaction going forward over the hour. Ashish, so diving into your question, well, at the outset, let me tell you that I feel that there has not really been any kind of dichotomy between the markets and what the economy has probably done in the recent past. And let me tell you why. Basically, at one level, I think there's a real economy and there's a financial economy, and both of which at one level are tied to the hip. And I think what only happens is that at certain points in time, the real economy starts asserting itself, and in certain other situations, like what we've seen in the crisis today, the financial economy actually starts asserting itself. But I think both are equally important, and they kind of play complementary to each other. Um, Going back in time, and you wanted to probably get a global context of things as well. Let me tell you that since I think 1750, I think probably the US, and that is where I'll pick data from there because that's an economy where we actually have data. We've got something like 49 recessions and something like 6 depressions since 1750. So the last 270 odd years. And none of these up until 2008, the crisis of 2008, the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009, actually had any kind of federal or fiscal intervention. So neither the central banks of the world nor the governments of the world have ever brought about any kind of intervention in any of the recessions in the earlier times. And I think that is probably one of the reasons in which, due to which some of these recessions actually slipped into a depression as well. Probably if you are looking at 1929, 1930, the latest depression that we have been aware of, and that too goes back almost 90 years. At that point in time, I think the authorities at that stage actually tried reducing interest rates by nearly about 350 basis points in a very short period of time of a few months. So probably something like 6% in the US was brought down to about 2.5%, but with actually zero effect as far as the economy went. Simply because the overall assumption was that interest rates actually will be the savior, and as you make the cost of money cheaper and cheaper, it will probably lead to a recovery in the economy. But none of that happened almost until 3 years later, because and it only happened because at that point in time the federal the U.S. Federal authorities actually started to increase the monetary base, and monetary expansion and money supply actually started to come back into the economy, and that was very important at that stage, and it is as important at this stage as of today as well. And I think that eventually led to credit growth getting created in the system, and actually the economy is coming back with some very strong growth in the subsequent years, somewhere between 1934 and 1937. I think something similar happened in 2008, 2009 as well, which is there in the memory of many of us who are probably on the show today. And at that point in time as well, that was the first time actually that the federal authorities actually had a very strong intervention come about in the very immediate few months after the global financial crisis actually set in. But even at that point in time, the recovery was very, very tepid and muted, simply because the fact that the monetary base at that point was not in a position to expand. And that was because the banks in the US particularly, and many parts of the world as well, were actually overextended. We had an over-leveraged banking system at that point in time, as you know, and coming out of the huge growth in the years prior to that, not just in the US, but across the world. And then, of course, we all know what followed in the form of the mortgage crisis, which set in, which actually led to a lot of banks having to do a lot of balance sheet repair for almost a period of 3 or 4 years post that. And as a result of which, actually, even though the Fed actually started to pump in a lot of money, it didn't really translate into any meaningful credit growth in the system. Eventually, it happened only probably towards the last 2 or 3 years that we know of, and starting, let's say, 2016, 2017. But otherwise, it didn't really give a lot of fillip to the real economy. And even though US enjoyed a period of very, very steady and discontinuous expansion, continuous expansion rather, for a long period of 10 years, but it was a very, very sober kind of growth. And that was because throughout this period, the monetary base never went beyond 4 to 5%. It was only recently in 2019 that actually that base went up from 4% to 8%. And that was because finally it was a situation where the banks had come out of their long period of repair and recapitalization. The leverage was down nearly 30% from what it was 10 years ago, and their ability to now, finance credit back into the system was had come back. So I think the importance of liquidity in the system should not be disregarded, and it is extremely critical during these kind of conditions, because during these period of time, it is the central banks who have the real backstop, and they can obviously provide as much of liquidity as is required, but not with the intention to actually inflate markets. It is not the intention of either the US Fed or maybe the RBI here to target a certain level of the index or the markets. The target is essentially to bring about normalcy in the credit markets, try to make sure that overdrawn credit lines of corporates are actually provided for, and corporates which undergo this kind of a scenario do not face a problem as far as getting funding is concerned. And of course, along with which there is also the objective of making sure that businesses, cash flow losses of businesses are made up, and household incomes are also probably to some extent provided for. But it is with the overall intention to actually restore the economy back to an even keel. And I think that's what central bankers around the world have been doing. So, but as a result of which, of course, the markets have pepped up, and we've seen this whole 40% decline, which came out of sheer panic to a great degree, and then the realization that look, there is an attempt to actually restore back the economies. Of course, along with which there were a host of other issues as well, which actually started to turn around, including things like work towards treatment of the virus, and the fact that the economy started to unlock as well. But the principal driver was the fact that there was, as Mrinal also mentioned, that we have the federal governments which are along with the central banks, which are going to backstop whatever comes in their way. So I think it should be treated as such. I don't think it is right to interpret that liquidity is driving the markets. Markets are only responding to what the liquidity can do in the markets, especially to the businesses and to the economies. And yes, there is we have a distance to travel. We'll have to we'll know over the next coming quarters how quickly we can restore the system back to normal. It will differ in country by country. Maybe the US, because it had a relatively better economic conditions around it even before it went into the virus, may be able to recover faster than perhaps let's say an economy like India. But I think it is important to distinguish between the two. So to that extent, I don't really find any dichotomy as such. Markets responded first with initial fear, and that was absolutely correct in what the market did in the initial phases. And then after that, the realization that there is liquidity which is coming back, and the economic situation to begin with was not as bad as, let's say, it was in 2008, 2009, because we had a real balance sheet related crisis at that stage. Maybe India probably has a little bit of that, but across the world, we don't really have as much of a balance sheet related issue at this stage. So I think markets were fair to even come back in blazing with guns blazing all over, and we've seen a very sharp recovery in the last 3 months. But yes, I mean, we'll have to watch from now onwards as to where we can head. It's now a relatively more balanced situation than what probably we were, let's say, about 3 months ago or maybe 6 months ago. Over to you, Ashish.
Yeah, thanks, Tahir. Just very quickly following up on one of the points you mentioned, liquidity, and that's the most contentious part, that everybody believes a lot of rally in the markets is being driven by liquidity that has been infused. I think Mrinal also kind of hinted that retail was sitting on surplus cash, and retail is also participating. In the US, it's the US Fed. Now, just one sub point to that. Do you think liquidity, besides just being a driver of the rally, can also be a solution to the problem in terms of buying out time and actually triggering off pent-up demand? I think to a large extent, one can say the liquidity was the solution to the problem in 2009. The US Fed clearly seems to have taken a view that's the solution this time around. Is it going to be the case, or it can be different? And as I said, I go back to Mrinal after this for a sub point that he raised in his points.
Yeah, so like as I said, I think this clearly has to be the kind of solution that we can have. This is probably, to my mind, the only solution which can come around at this stage. Otherwise, without the liquidity, we can very well imagine where we could probably be 3 months from, where 3 months from where we are today. So I think liquidity is clearly important. And like as I said, it is not as much with the intention of targeting a certain level of the market in mind. It is more with the intention of restoring credit availability in the system. And I think yes, of course, the mode of providing the liquidity will matter. Is it going to be significantly up over and above what you probably require to bring normalcy to the system, which then probably can raise the specter of inflation as we go ahead. But otherwise, I don't really think in a situation like this where, look, I mean, this is a problem where we have, this is not a regular recession. This is not a typical recession. Here, the recession has actually been forced onto us because in order to make sure that the transmission of the virus does not happen or is restricted to whatever degree, we've been asked to stay back home. So it's a forced recession. It is not caused, as I said at the outset, because of existing imbalances within the economies. Maybe to some extent in certain economies, but not of the nature which it was probably in 2008, 2009. So I would like to think that the extent to which the liquidity has been made available, and probably all of it has yet not been unleashed into the system as yet. But I think as and when it happens, probably the nature of the recovery, probably at least in certain economies, probably like the US, where, like as I said, that they had a relatively better position before they went into the virus. I think we could probably see a very vigorous recovery for the US in particular, maybe some of the other global developed economies in 2021, calendar year 2021. And I think they will have the potential to pull along some of the other economies, including developing economies like India too. So I think liquidity was essential in a nutshell.
Thanks, Tahir. Mrinal, if I may just, you mentioned a very pertinent point that earnings market looks much more expensive on a PE basis, the way, both side by side looks at it. But if I look at, our own strategist, global strategist, Sean Darby, he's been saying that certain lead indicators suggest that July will see a wave of upward revision in earnings. It's not the first time. In 2009 also, we saw that the markets initially had a V-shaped recovery, and that was followed by a similar V-shaped recovery in earnings estimate. Do you think the analysts have been over bearish again? And do you think in the next few months we see earnings getting upgraded in a meaningful manner? Mrinal?
Yeah, that's right, Ashish. That can very well be the case. My disposition is that we are going to see a very diverse set of profitability for sectors and companies going ahead. Because a lot of the profit compressions that have happened across sectors, across companies, due to Corona or lack of economic activity, are going to stay for some more time till we find things to normalize. The whole issue is, as I had mentioned, we've had a lockdown, which in economic terms is a forced demand shock. Now, starting afresh or trying to move the economy out of a sudden stop has its own challenges. It takes time. It takes time in the sense you need to have the labor supply chain in place. You have to have the material supply chain in place. And those kind of things will take time. And so we might have a gradual tepid recovery. So the whole important point I'm trying to say is the market, in a way, is already saying that the economy should recover in, let's say, next 18 months or so, give or take some months, and to a degree, let's say it is estimating 20% compression of earnings from what they were in the past, but then it is still mentioning growth. So although I mentioned, I know that the profit outlook for FY22 has been brought down 23%. What is interesting to know is it is still a growth over current FY20 EPS. So the point I'm trying to say, there is going to be growth. The economy is going to revive. There's no doubt about it. It is just that, when there is abundant liquidity in the system, and there is a good reason why liquidity should be around, it is more material for the economy. It is more material for the credit markets. So, but then it does have a side effect on asset prices in other spheres of the economy. So, given that there is liquidity around, the markets are already pricing in some bit of recovery, some bit of growth, which leaves less to safety, which there is lesser of caution. And what I fear and worry most about is a lot of these projections that I see, particularly on sector and companies, seem to suggest that, you know, things are going to be similar like they were in the past, let's say in calendar year 19 or something like that. Wherein my sense is, my assessment is that a lot of it is going to change. There is going to be unprecedented change. We are in an era or a time zone where the amount of changes that we are going to see is going to be enormous. And it is driven by the consumer. It is driven by the economy and the realities in the economy rather than the markets. Markets respond to the economy. So that's where I put things, Ashish. Over to you.
So thanks. Let me just quickly ask a flip question. Do you think, while generally the disconnect is always construed to be a bullish disconnect, do you think that there is a bearish disconnect in the market as well? You know, some sectors are being overly penalized, or some companies which are good in an otherwise bad sectors, and they actually would be on the right side of consolidation, or as things recover, some sectors will have much bigger or much sharper recovery. And that's where the opportunity is. Maybe we can just briefly talk about this. Minal, starting with you once again first.
Okay. Oh, it's a very relevant point you've raised, Ashish. So, in my view, it is no longer about sectors. It is about companies. It is about the survivors. It is about the balance sheet. So, in the same sector, if there is a company which has much stronger balance sheet, it is going to be a beneficiary of the current times. It is about the relevance of your goods and services, because in changing times, how relevant are you or your goods and services, or how you've adapted? It's in the mindset, actually. It's about adaptability. So you're right, there is a bearish disconnect. And there is quite a lot of, sectoral view that gets taken even now, wherein I feel that, it is more pertinent to look at companies now. In the same sector, when we look back maybe 3, 4, 5 years later, the earnings or the returns divergence could be very, very high. Obviously, the better balance sheets are in a better position to consolidate, and this is what exactly you are pointing at. So a lot of sectors I'm seeing, that they're getting thumped just because that sector is in trouble, wherein the individual companies could actually get in a very advantageous position. Now, it's also important to for me to point out, that index, particularly because index gets tracked very, very often, and the aggregate number of index is relevant, no doubt about it. But index, the rear view mirror. It's full of companies which have done well in the past, and that's no guarantee that the same set of companies will do well in the future. But that's a barometer. That's a broader barometer. That's a large companies that represents the economy in general. That represents the market in general in a large way. But in changing times, we've seen transition into index, and that continuously happens. In current phase, my hunch is that the amount of transition that we'll see in the composition of index going ahead, and that is a reflection of the changes that will happen on the ground and the businesses and their relevance in terms of how they go about addressing customer unmet needs, is going to be very, very high. So that's how I would look at it. There is a bearish disconnect, yes, Ashish, but then I think it is important that we move to companies rather than sectors. Index is important, but we need to keep in mind it's a rear view mirror. We need to be cognizant of how things are changing. Which are the businesses more relevant, which are stronger, which are coming up with new products and services, which are addressing the unmet needs of the consumer, and maybe they are the ones which have a bright future going ahead.
Thanks. Tahir, quickly your views on the bearish disconnect?
Well, so yeah, I think the reaction of the Indian markets was pretty much on similar lines compared to what it was globally. And in the first instance, as Mrinal mentioned, when the crisis actually got unfolded sometime in middle of March, the first reaction was basically to, of course, panic. And then after the panic was behind us, the idea was to once picking up the crumbs was essentially about going to safer havens, essentially more about companies which would survive. So survivability was the key question at that point in time. And to that extent, obviously, across different markets and across different sectors within a market as well, everybody tried to gravitate towards survivors. And at that time, I don't think there was as much of discrimination between different sectors. Of course, the financial services space, the overall banking and financial services space, which was lagging behind up until even about a month ago, and that was clearly because of the fact that ultimately everything in an economic recession always starts, finally ending up at the doorsteps of the banks or the financial institutions or the non-banking financial institutions, so to speak. So to that extent, I think again there was a fair reaction of the market, probably to be a little cautious as far as that sector is, in fact, overly cautious, if I were to say so, in the initial phases. I think over a period of time that has changed. So, for example, I think in the month of June, we've seen a distinct shift towards the approach of investors in the market, and that is again not only in India, it's also a similar phenomenon that we've seen globally as well. That the market has started to broaden out. So actually, we are now seeing the market go beyond the survivors, probably onto balance sheets, which perhaps might have a little bit of stress, but they're not going to kind of disappear and not going to close down shop. So I think beta to some degree has started to come back. The market has started to believe that the economy can get back on its feet. Of course, the fact that economies around the world have started to unlock has also helped. And I think the market has responded accordingly. So there have been, probably even the financial services sector to that extent has actually made a reasonably decent comeback in the last 1 to 1.5 months time. And that's again coming out of the consequence that, the initially feared stress on the banking and financial services space on account of moratoriums, on account of credit culture deteriorating, et cetera, is probably not likely to come to pass to the same degree as what it was thought to be in the first 2 or 3 months. So I think that realization has started to come. I agree with Mrinal that this is, I mean, we as fund managers have been kind of watching this for the last many years now, and I think I can say this from my own experience that between let's say 2010 and 2015, 2016 or so, the first 5 years of the last decade, there was a fair bit of sector rotation which was available and which used to keep coming in the market. But I think over the last 5 years, there's a distinct trend that we see a lot of companies within a sector actually diverge. So you will find that there are underperformers and very stark outperformers within a particular industry as well, whether be it oil and gas or be it FMCG for that matter, maybe autos too, other parts of consumer discretionary, even pharma for that matter, has actually not been a very consistent performer. So I think individual business picking, stock picking has actually grown in relevance significantly in India, probably induced by the recession. Yes, we might have a little bit of sector rotation going forward as well. And that's simply because there are a few more sectors which are still lagging behind. I think maybe today industries such as technology for that matter, I think IT, even commodities, maybe industrials, these are areas which are still kind of, having a certain bit of bearish disconnect, as you say. They've not really done as much in the recent recovery of the markets either. I think maybe there is a case out there simply because some of these are globally oriented sectors, and it is up for debate whether India is going to recover first or many other countries around the world are going to probably recover faster. So I think there are a few of these laggard sectors which come to our mind, but I think it is still a significantly bottom up market, and I probably think it will stay so even going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Tahir. Let's move on to the real economy. We've spoken about the markets for the first 15-20 minutes or so. Let's move on. How do you think things would change post-COVID, and what are the new trends that you are seeing emerging across industries, companies? What could be the implications? And one of the points that is often made is, compared to the rest of the world, which has done a huge stimulus, India's stimulus at 1.5% to 2% of GDP in the real terms has been very, very muted, and that would impact real economy or demand as and when it comes. So maybe we can start with you, Tahir. How do you think the economy will shape up and the post-COVID world?
Yeah, Ashish. So I think there's going to be a fair bit of changes in a post-COVID world. I think we are probably going to be at a very macro level. We are probably going to be confronted with a consumer which is going to be very defensive. We are going to be talking about borrowers and lenders who are also going to be significantly defensive. we are going to be talking a lot about digital intervention and different kinds of businesses, and it is already happening. It was a trend. It's going to get only reinforced and further accelerated in a post-COVID world. I think we are probably looking at a scenario where government intervention and government spending, public spending, is going to play a critical role, and is going to get only bigger so the role of the states is probably going to get bigger as we go forward, because private sector again is going to be relatively more defensive. There's going to be a whole trend of increasing financialization of savings is probably going to continue, because savings itself will increase. I think just out of the sheer anxiety of lives and livelihoods, I think our inclination to save actually is going to go up, and that's going to have its own repercussions in different kinds of businesses as we go along. So these are some of the key features which, to my mind, I think are going to become much more prominent as we go ahead in a post-COVID world. And it's probably going to have its influence in terms of growth rates, as well as some of the businesses as well. Of course, the whole trend of consolidation of businesses is going to get even more rapid. We had the whole unorganized to organized swing starting. Maybe demonetization probably getting accelerated further due to GST, and now probably is going to get an even further boost as a result of this COVID crisis. So I think we are going to see all these kind of things, impinge on the real economy. Consumer spending patterns today, probably to my mind, I think remains the most unclear at this stage as to how people will behave. See, there's a lot of impact on the psyche of all of us sitting in our houses over the last 4 to 5 months. As we come out of this, how are we going to behave? Are we going to be defensive? Is there going to be some kind of a revenge spending, as has probably been seen in some countries, in some of the developed economies? Is it something like that that's probably going to happen? So all sort of things are up in the air at this stage, and we'll have to we'll get to know maybe over the next couple of quarters. Many a times we even overdo speculating around significant behavioral changes. Many a time we see human beings have a tendency to not change as much, or maybe the changes are relatively gradual. So we all would expect that many things would change, but we might probably be surprised to the contrary, and many things may probably just continue at the same pace, or they might change, but they might change at such a slow pace that you might probably not really decipher it at all. So I think these are the trends which are going to play. I think for India, it's we have some bit of ammunition in us going for ourselves. So we all know that the rural economy and the agricultural ecosystem is doing exceedingly well, and I think that's something which is very welcome. This is something on the basis of which we were actually even pinning for a possible economic recovery, albeit at a slower pace. But we were pre-COVID, we were actually thinking of at least 2020-21 calendar years being better than the 2018-19 calendar years in terms of economic growth. And unfortunately, it's got punctured by the whole COVID development. But I think one strong pillar on which we were predicating that was the rural economy, which had already started to show some signs of improvement even pre-COVID. And I think that's something which is only getting stronger, and it has the ability to pull quite a section of our economy along. So I think we were on a weak footing to begin with pre-COVID, but I don't really think we would have slipped into a recession of the nature which is happening after COVID. So I think agriculture to that extent is a great driver. I think we also know that there are, barring some of the urban centers of India, which probably account for 2/3 of the cases, the virus cases as of today, are relatively free of, or maybe not as affected by the virus situation. So for that part of the economy to actually revive, come back to a situation of normalcy quicker than expected is higher, and I would think that in that lies the defense for the Indian economy. I think the other one important thing which has started to happen, which is accelerated as a trend, is actually the transmission of interest rates. We this, Ashish, very well, that we've been really struggling as an economy to get rates transmitted in the system for one reason or the other. There is a defensive banking sector. There is still a lot of NPAs which had to be cleared out over the last few years, and the fear of the risk aversion towards lending, all that, it probably led to a situation where even though interest rates had actually come down in the system, they were not getting transmitted enough. So we saw almost 125 odd basis points of decline in interest rates in repo rates pre-COVID, and probably not even 50% of that actually got transmitted. But I think we've seen another 115 odd basis points actually decline in the post-COVID months, and we've seen a significantly higher proportion of that getting transmitted this time around. So I think interest rates are rapidly coming down in the system, and that's something which I think will hold out pretty well. It was something that India had urgently wanted for a very long period of time, and unfortunately was not forthcoming. And I think that's something which probably can help us in these dire times. Over to you, Ashish.
Great, thanks, Tahir. Rinal, can we have your views on how do you think economy will change post-COVID?
So again, this is something that I think a lot about. So interestingly, for the benefit of audience, I mean, one thing that is going to happen for sure, given that, as Tahir also mentioned, government is going to be a large part of economy as well as an influencer in everything that happens around and that impacts us. Higher taxes is going to be a change that is going to happen. So get ready for higher taxes in one form or the other. That's going to happen. So this matters to everybody, includes us, includes the audience. So that's a trend you should be aware about. Tax planning would be important going ahead. Your investments, your consumption, everything will be woven around it. Automation, I think a lot of automation as of now, till now, has been restricted to few economies and few industries. I think automation, given that most parts of the world have seen labor supply chain getting disrupted very meaningfully, and that remains the case, I think automation is going to get accelerated. It was already taking over, but that is going to get accelerated. Entertainment, there's going to be a redefinition of entertainment as a place. I mean, what is IPL? Is IPL an entertainment? Is it cricket? Is going out to a garden or a mall or a movie entertainment? So I think people need entertainment. So the definition and the way entertainment spendings happen will change. And it's still fluid. There are no clear-cut answers, but that's a space which is a large bucket of spending for consumers that needs to be watched. And everybody's talking about deglobalization. I think that's a trend too. For example, Atmanirbhar, that has been talked about by the Prime Minister here, or America First, or anything equivalent anywhere in the world. I think deglobalization, although it's easier said than done, but then I guess that's a trend that's going to happen. We need to keep that on the back of our head. At least import substitution in India is something in the context of Indian economy is a promising space. We will see a lot of effort and incentives that will come across in that direction. Rural is doing well, and that's a shining part of the economy. I think anything to do with the agrarian economy and the likes continues to do well, and that's a nice thing, because large part of Indian economy and the population is engaged with it, so it benefits. We are going to see leaps and bounds of progress in e-commerce. I mean, they've clearly crossed the critical mass, and they will be big. And what all they can do, it still remains to be seen. Commercial real estate, along with mobility. Now, what kind of mobility is the consumer going to demand tomorrow? Is he going to prefer public transport? Are there going to be flexi times? Is there going to be a combination of work from home? So the mobility requirements will be different. The office space requirements will be different. The residential requirements will be different. So there is a whole lot of transition that will happen in that space. Mobility, which includes business travel and anything associated with it, along with commercial and residential real estate. Some pockets will see demand. Some pockets might see rates coming down, not necessarily demand coming down. And demand for credit, because banks are going to be, or the lenders are going to be cautious. So what kind of credit demand gets serviced? That is something that we need to clearly watch. And interestingly, with more emphasis on healthcare and healthier way of life, whenever Corona is behind us, I think there is going to be higher life expectancy. And that was anyway a trend. The advancement in medical sciences have resulted in life expectancy going higher. And we are in a low return world. So there is a combination of higher taxes, higher life expectancy, low returns, lower income growth, and pension funds struggling to generate income. So there is a dichotomy over there also. So these are trends which I clearly see. Communication is already picking up, and technology associated with communication. It is one of those ways we are doing this panel discussion, which is something that we wouldn't have thought about maybe even 6 months ago. And you know, the most important, again, I'm overemphasizing this, the government is going to be a large part of us, be it economy, be it us. We will feel it through the taxes, and the economy is going to feel with their dependence on their spending, and that's going to be there. Over to you, Ashish.
Thanks, Mrinal. Many interesting sub points you have mentioned. We can talk about each of them for hours, but let me move on to probably the last point in the session, and then we can have, I'm sure there are many questions that are popping up. So what would be your recommendation for retail investors here? You know, you touched upon the new world, higher taxes, higher life expectancy. Already we are seeing return on ARP funds and liquid funds are down to single digits, very low to single digits. How do you suggest investors position their portfolios, especially if all the liquidity is likely to drive inflation up, if you believe so? Do you think investors need to take a fresh look at physical assets or property for investments, as physical assets usually do well in times of rising or higher inflation? Or do you think it's, you know, equity ownership increase is something that every investor should look for? And, you know, maybe we can start with Tahir for this on recommendation for retail investors. Over to you, Tahir.
Yeah, Ashish. So I've been an equities guy all through. Fixed income doesn't really come to me very easily, but nonetheless, I would say this, that we need to configure our investment portfolios in a relatively more broader manner, keeping in mind the conditions that we are going through. Yes, we are trying to emerge out of these challenges, and probably life will get better as we go along, I'm sure. But I think when we are thinking about investments, we need to be rational. So I would say that typically fixed income has generally, for at least Indians, has generally been the bedrock, and it has comprised a very large proportion of the overall investment, simply for the steady flow of income which it guarantees. But evidence over the recent past has actually shown it to be probably as risky and whimsical as probably equities are. And to that extent, I think there might be a need to recalibrate that equation to some degree, and probably shift something out of fixed income to a little more towards equities at this stage. I think we all know that equities at one level, and especially compared to other investment avenues such as real estate or gold or any other physical investment avenue, is something which is associated with growth. Companies, organizations grow. Real estate doesn't really grow. 1,000 square feet flat will remain 1,000 square feet flat forever. And 10 kgs of gold is not going to become 10.1 at any point in time. But businesses are growing organisms, and to that extent, I think if you have to participate in growth, you don't really have a choice but to be in equities. I think despite all this, what we've gone through in the last many years, it's quite surprising that we still managed to give about, equities has managed about a 6-7% compounded return over the last 5 years, and maybe more like an 8-9% even over the last 10 years. And that's everything combined, including the virus. So I think, and that's not a bad outcome at all. So, and probably on a post-tax adjusted basis, maybe it might work out even better. So I think, return expectations, of course, need to be calibrated downwards. That's one, but that is also because to some degree we are going to be confronted with significantly lower interest rates compared to what we were having in the past, and maybe that justifies that. But I think a shift towards equities to some degree will be warranted over and above probably other savings instruments, which are probably going to be more in the nature of insurance and some of the other financial saving products, which will form the rest. But I think some bit of shift towards equities as an asset class is probably going to be merited by everybody as we go along, in my view.
Sure. Mrinal, would love to hear your views on the same as well.
So my recommendation would be investors should diversify, and based on what is a more attractive asset class, they should obviously allocate more towards it. In at least the context of equities, I would recommend, and we do get them even now, what I'm going to say, high dividend yield companies would be an interesting thing. In fact, you can choose to put a part of your fixed income allocation even in high dividend yield companies. They are pseudo bonds in nature. If you think that's sustainable kind of dividend yields, and we get a lot of them in 5% plus category even now, that's a very attractive one. So in equities and high dividend yield also ensures that the cash generation is there. They are willing to share with the minority shareholders and the like. So that's one. And I would portion a large portion of asset allocation over there. Then on the physical asset side, but I'm not much of a believer on the real estate. I mean, to me, it's too illiquid and too diverse and all complications and not tax efficient. Although there are obviously people who specialize in it, maybe I'm not the right person to talk about it. But on the physical asset side, maybe gold can be considered as a hedge. Some bit of gold is not a bad thing. It's a dollar asset, it is liquid. So amongst those two physical asset combinations, I would say. But one point, Ashish, you mentioned, inflation. If inflation does come across in any form, I mean, in classical economics, for inflation to come across, the output gap, basically demand has to surpass the output. And we are having a reverse scenario now. But then, even then, inflation can come across if there is too much of asset price inflation due to too much of money going in that direction. And that actually is troublesome. But in any case, if inflation does come across, I'm not saying it does, then bonds are not a great place to be. Bonds don't do well in a high inflation scenario. Maybe high dividend yield would be a good option at that point. Maybe gold. Gold also has a history of dealing with inflation. But then the empirical evidence is in favor of equities for even beating inflation over long run. I mean, the whole USP of equities has been that's the only asset class which has comfortably beaten inflation in the long run. And that's only index. So if you do a bit better than index, and obviously, and there are phases obviously when there are high inflation that, physical assets do well. But from a longer perspective, I mean, nothing beats equity. So if you've got a 10-year goal, financial goal, I think equities is the place to be. If you've got a 3-year goal, maybe you should diversify a bit, and if you've got even higher range monies in terms of time, I think it is undeniably in favor of equities. You need to spread. You need to spread your investment into equities, and you need to choose the right kind of products. And I think that should go fine.
That's a great summary. I think we should now open the floor for questions, and maybe I can hand over the floor back to Rita, who's coordinating the question queue. Over to you, Rita.
Thanks, Ashish, Mrinal, and Tahir. That was a fantastic session. A lot of thoughts, lots of views, lots of information, lots to digest. Clearly, the chat box has been buzzing with questions while you all were in the panel discussion. Before I take questions from the chat, there was one I thought I would ask you, Ashish. You do speak to global investors, various kinds, various strategies. How are they viewing India? As in the question being, how does an EM investor looking at India think of India at the moment versus maybe somebody who's based out of Asia looking at India?
Well, I think Mrinal kind of touched upon that. For most investors, India seems to be one of the still offering the strongest growth potential within the emerging markets as well. So, most of the countries have their own struggle when it comes to growth. The good part is the government, all said and done, is still the largest owner of the assets, and hence the dependency on external debt for India is far lower than it is for most of the other emerging markets. Now, we have our own, border issues, geopolitical issues, but by and large, the quality of companies that have been displaying growth consistently over the last decade too is probably the highest in India among some of the other emerging markets. And which is why I think, we touched upon it earlier, it has become a bottom-up market. People are looking at individual stocks. There are enough investors globally who are using this opportunity to either increase single stock positions or build up on their existing position. So there is definitely a lot more interest versus, say, a few months back. But it's no longer buy India or stay away from India. It's predominantly, do I buy a particular stock or a particular sector, or rather stay away from that. So yes, the long and short, there is interest. People are doing work, and I won't be surprised if there is a lot more flow that comes to India. So the proportion of retail, which is what Mrinal mentioned, as high as 70%, I think that's definitely at its peak. And going forward, we should see more participation from FII and DII, both in the markets.
Thanks, Ashish. Another question for Tahir and Rinal, and this is a little different, and I think I saw somebody ask a similar question as well. ESG funds are a relatively new phenomenon in India. Clearly, this is a theme that has worked out in other countries much earlier, and there is a lot of appreciation from investors as well. Given where we are at the moment and in the middle of the pandemic, do you think this kind of a theme will pick up momentum going forward? Do we really have any data here that supports the fact that ESG funds actually yield superior returns in times of crisis? Tahir, if you can go first, and then Rinal.
Yes, Rita, we have actually been constrained to find any relation to returns as far as ESG funds are concerned. So there is very little to very convincingly say that an ESG fund typically enhances returns over non-ESG fund. But the way we've been doing at Invesco a lot of work around ESG, and we are globally we are recognized as being at the forefront as far as the overall ESG initiative towards investing is concerned. And we're trying to kind of do our own bit in India as well. But the way we look at ESG is with the notion that it is more of risk mitigation as well, rather than just a return enhancement. So we believe that companies who are geared towards ESG or are stronger on the ESG front, whether be it in terms of governance or probably in terms of environment or social, whichever of the factors it might be, but sustainability of their growth and the quality of their growth tends to over longer periods of time be better compared to, let's say, the non-ESG companies. And their ability to kind of navigate difficult times turns out to be better compared to, let's say, the non-ESG companies. And to that extent, maybe markets do take cognizance at some level and probably weave it into the valuation of these enterprises compared to some who are probably inferior on ESG scores or probably are completely non-ESG either. So I think we don't approach it with the intention of maximizing returns, but we approach it with the intention of managing returns, improving the quality of the returns, and at the same time, as I said, risk mitigation and risk protection.
Rinal, your thoughts?
Yeah, so in the ESG framework, clearly, at least the institutional money is very sensitive to ESG, and that's going to be a trend which will only accelerate. But having said that, the G part, the governance part, was always part of evaluation for every investor, professional investor. So the governance, that I'm very clear that the better governed company deliver better return to stakeholders across the board. So that's there. But the ES part, and the ES part is actually not a very standard definition. So we see the Nordics having a very different definition. So, pension funds from north of Europe have a very strictest definition of ESG or ES part in particular, compared to, let's say, some funds from Australia, New Zealand, or even for that matter, US. But then there are large pension funds from, let's say, South America or even Far East, China, Middle East that actually don't have a ESG constraint. But G was always there. It will continue to be there, and there is empirical evidence for G having done. Better governed companies deliver better returns to stakeholders, no doubt about it. Environmental and social is something that is, as Tahir also mentioned, is something that is the right thing to do. Incremental money should go in that direction. I think that's a trend that will continue. The data is still not, it's both ways actually. Sometimes we see data which favors one set of approach, sometimes we see on the other set of approach. But then again, sustainability, social, environment, I think that is going to be the thing going ahead. But then that's not a constraining function for investors. G is definitely, but that was always there, so there's nothing new about it. All good professional investors are very conscious about better governed companies. No two ways about it. Environmental and social is something that continues to evolve. I think the world hasn't stabilized in clearly defining ES in the first place. There is still not data, and I think it's too early to seek data that it does better or not. But then it is the right thing to do. I think almost everybody agrees.
I think, Rita, if I may just add here that The other thing that we probably do, at least our end, is, and probably many other firms that are doing it as well in their ESG approaches, that we're not, there are very few investors globally who follow an exclusionary practice of ESG, in the sense that they actually say that we will not invest in ABC because of ESG reasons. Most of the funds actually do not have an exclusionary approach. Most of the funds or investors have an approach that, look, we will invest. What we need to see is the path to ESG, in the sense that, do we see incrementally ESG scores getting better for those companies? Are they doing the right things in order to enhance their social practices or environment practices, or maybe even the governance practices for that matter? And if that were to be the case, then they are not necessarily excluded from our investment universe. And I think that to me appeals to be a better strategy compared to saying that, look, I will not invest at all and in certain sectors or certain types of companies, be it defense or be it liquor or maybe any of the other sin industries for that matter. We are following a relatively more democratic approach as far as ESG is concerned.
Thanks, Tahir, for that. Ashish, there are a couple of questions for you. The first one is based on your sell-side experience, how do you see FII flows in India, considering that India will recover much later than the rest of the world due to current COVID testing in India? Will FIIs avoid India for some time?
Well, I think I touched upon that. There is FII interest, even though, as you rightly said, India has been behind the curve. But the FII interest is not in the country overall; it is in very specific stocks. So I think I don't know whether the index does well overall or not, but there are a few stocks. The consolidation would be much faster. The select stocks will do far superior than the others. And hence, I think it's no longer a buy India or a sell India market, as I mentioned earlier. But there are definitely a lot more FIIs that are engaging in the recent times, because a number of FIIs didn't participate in the earlier India rally. And they were sitting on the sidelines saying valuations are too expensive. For someone who's taking a 10-year view, there are people who think that it's okay if 1 year earnings don't come through. In a 20-year DCF cycle or a 10-year DCF cycle, it doesn't really change my valuation significantly. And this is my time to get into quality stocks, which historically I've avoided. So there is definitely FII money sitting on the sideline.
Sure. Ashish, if you put on your bank analyst hat for a moment, there's a question somebody's asking, where are we in the bank NPA cycle at the moment?
Well, I believe, again, I think there is going to be a differentiation. There are companies which have essentially made their business model in the last few years purely on liquidity and not really invested in differentiating either underwriting or funding franchise. These are the companies which will be on the wrong side of earnings as well as market prices. Whereas the other companies who have been slow and steady growers over a period of time and have really invested in differentiating their business model, diversifying their funding franchise, would come out as winners. And I actually believe there would be some financial entities where FY21 growth can be higher than what it was in FY20, not because of the organic growth, but because there are a lot more players who are forced to shrink their balance sheets because they don't have funding. And the guys who have will be buying their portfolio. So it's probably the mother of all consolidation that the financial sector can see. There'll be far fewer companies that will survive, at least from an equity market cap criteria, in the next 12 months or 18 months. Sorry, one more point, Rita, on the prior question. What we probably fully don't appreciate is there is a lot of money sitting in the US on the sideline. I think if you look at the US money supply, it is almost 2 to 3 times higher than what we have seen even in the 2009 crisis in money market funds. So that money is parked with negative interest rates across the world. There is definitely a lot more money chasing growth, and which is why probably India would still feature right at the top in the emerging market if that money were to find its way into equities.
Okay, thank you. One question that always comes up in webinars like this, what sectors of economy do you think would recover the fastest after phased unlocking? Mrinal, first your thoughts and then Tahir.
Okay, so, clearly the data continues, the high frequency data favors the rural side of the economy. I think there that's clearly showing resilience. And because there is a lot of government push and stimulus in that direction, I think recovery over there could potentially be quite fast. And that's more to do with the government. Plus, corona is largely an urban disease. At least up till now, it's an imported one. So the impact has been lesser. That's one. Then there are a couple of sectors which clearly benefit. The demand for data has gone up, so telecom is very, very well placed, and it's got consolidated in the last 2-3 years. So the existing players are, in such an environment, we have an industry where volumes are galloping, and the demand seems to be long lasting. So it's a very good thing for that sector. So they'll obviously, as long as there's demand, the businesses will find a way to address it. I mean, they're in a sweet spot. So telecom clearly. And there could be businesses which could be facing the economies which could recover faster, like maybe US. So if you get an agri exporter, which benefits on both sides, which benefits on the rural side, is an exporter also. Let's say, and if it does export to North America or developed world or something like that, then that's great. It's an ideal place to be. Then at some point, obviously, we will see sharp upticks, because every time such a downturn happens, upticks are always sharp in the economy. So whenever it happens, we will see sharp upticks in economic activity, logistics. Then it's a function of risk reward in a lot of other sectors. And there would be new businesses which will address the new unmet needs that the consumers have put across. So I'll just stop it at that. There can be actually a host of things that could potentially, but this is all dependent upon, some kind of medical solution or some kind of solution coming across for corona issue. Because as of now, the consumers are defensive. And at the end of every value chain, be it B2B or B2C, there has to be a consumer willing to pay. As long as the consumer is willing to pay, the value chain will figure out a way to address that need. So things have to normalize on the mindset of the consumer. He has to feel comfortable about his future. He shouldn't feel uneasy, restless, or insecure. And then I think things will be back to normal in quite a lot of cases. Over to you, Tahir.
Well, I'd say, for us in India, I think for a very long period of time, the banking and financial services sector has always been the pivot and has occupied center stage. We know that it is anywhere between 30 and 35% of most indices, and it is also, more importantly, a significant portion of the economy, given the fact that we have 55% in services and a large part of it is banking and financial related services. So I think, and that probably to my mind, I think even in a post-COVID world, maybe 5 years from now is not really going to change as much. 10 years, difficult to say, but over the next 5 years, as my eyes can see, as far as my eyes can see, I think, I don't think we are going to have many more sectors or businesses or industries which are going to become significantly material from an economic standpoint to become important elements of the market. Like in the US, for example, we know that the FAANGs are, whatever they are, a substantial portion of the market cap of the US markets today. Probably about 6 trillion out of the 30 odd trillion is in the 6 odd names. So I think we are probably far away from that scenario. Maybe there will be a few of these new emerging businesses which will clearly take center stage, but will they become a significant portion of the economy? It is a little hard to say or envisage at this stage. So I think, and we've seen a substantial amount of beating which has been given to this sector, and rightly so, maybe because, like as I said, that it all finally falls at the doorstep of the financial companies or the banks. I think maybe, like as I said earlier, that this is a place where there is a bearish disconnect, and I think if we were to probably get back to normalcy, and we see probably 6 months from now things returning to normalcy as far as our lives and livelihood is concerned, I think banking and financial services should probably play a central role. And their valuations are still not, they're reasonably attractive, I would say, despite the fact that we've seen some bit of rally in the last maybe 1.5 months time. So I think that's something which probably can lead the markets from here on. We also discussed the possibility of some of the globally oriented sectors such as tech, maybe commodities. We may probably find it difficult for India to have a full-fledged recovery in the next 1 year, given our own constraints. But we may probably be in a position to piggyback on some of the global growth engines. And I think maybe there could be some opportunities there in those pockets too. and especially from the point of view that valuations in those areas are relatively comfortable once again. So it's a good risk-reward equation prevailing out there. Lastly, maybe there could be room for some industrials as well. Again, laggards. But yes, I mean, as we discussed, if the public sector or the government actually starts playing an important role, and it does continue to remain a key driver of growth going forward, then there will be pockets of industrials as well, which would probably be in a position to fare well. Maybe they will come towards the later end of comfort, as in when the market is reasonably comforted that the economy is back on its feet, is when they will probably give you the returns. But today, I think valuations are once again very comfortable from a starting perspective in some of the subsegments of the industrial space. And today maybe there's an overlay or an overhang of the whole migrant-related issue, availability of labor, cost of labor, etc. Once that normalizes as well, I think some of these industrials can make a comeback too. So there are a set of laggards which perhaps are trading today and maybe probably have some catch up to do and could be interesting at this stage.
Sure. Being mindful of time as well, one last question: active investment versus passive investment. This is another one that typically always comes up on webinars like this. With larger companies becoming larger due to scale benefits and large-scale consolidation taking place in many sectors in recent times, passive investments seem to be better off. Your views, brief views, Tahir, and then Mrinal.
Well, for active managers like us, I think at least as far as countries like India go, we feel that there is a fair bit of active returns to be made in this economy, in this market. There are a lot of alpha opportunities which are still available. So it's an alpha-rich market in our view. And I think some of the trends which are perhaps, in fact, this is one area where I see a dichotomy. I mean, passive investing, which is getting a lot of popularity as far as developed markets is concerned, is having its right reasons out there, given the fact that finding alpha is becoming more and more challenging, and given the kind of costs which the industry has, probably investors are not left with anything on the table. But I don't really think that is the case as far as India is concerned. Maybe some of the other emerging market economies, especially some of the Eastern economies, also have a fair bit of alpha going for themselves, particularly places like China for that matter. We've even seen in our experience in Invesco that even countries like Japan actually have a reasonable amount of alpha that they are delivering across their funds. So for us, at least in my head, I think I'm running with a lot more active orientation. Passive will try and make its mark, but I think it will be slow on the uptick.
Mrinal?
So, well, I'll quote Howard Marks here. Interestingly, when your fund looks similar to everybody else, you can do well with them or you can do bad with them, but you can't do different than them. The important point I'm trying to put across with this is, active has to be truly active. I see a lot of ETF plus strategies around, which say we take 20% deviation from the index. And that is when some of the calls go wrong, you could very well be tracking behind, because the advantage that passive has is they run very low fees. So that delta of fees has to be justified. So the active managers, including us, have to think what kind of deviation and how do we go right and how do we beat. So the challenge number one for us active managers is passive clearly. But I have no doubt in my mind that wisely managed active product will beat passive hollow any day. And let's remember, as I mentioned earlier in the talk, index, which a passive one is a rear view mirror. It is not that all big companies will keep becoming bigger. It is stronger companies will become bigger. Not all big companies are strong. That's not the case. There are a lot of small companies which are strong. There are a lot of big companies which are weak. So it is going to be stronger companies will become bigger. Yes. But then there will be newer companies. And that's always the case. That's the ingenuity of the entrepreneur that will come and make it big. And we have always seen every 10 years, there is a new set of entrepreneurs which come and make it big. So index, please remember, index is a rear view mirror. It does well periodically till there is momentum. Whenever there are changes, whenever the tide comes down, index will have a problem against that.
Thank you. We've totally run out of time. We do have many more questions, which unfortunately we don't have time to take today. But thank you, Tahir, Ashish, Mrinal, for taking time once again on a Sunday for this absolutely engrossing, engaging, and insightful session. Took me back to my days on the sell side. And thanks to the audience as well to be here with us on a Sunday and for asking extremely probing questions. So until the next time, all of us meet again at the next CFS webinar. Stay safe and goodbye.